It's working? Hi. Sorry, just a second. Oops. No. Okay. Hi guys. So my presentation is going to be on simplified versus traditional Chinese. So the Chinese writing system is one of the oldest writing systems in the world. I think it was 1400 BC. Chinese writing had already evolved and refined to be something that's very, very similar to what we see today in traditional Chinese writing. Whereas simplified is like a very new invention. It wasn't until 1956 that the mainland Chinese government was like, okay, we're gonna reform the writing system. We're gonna use simplified instead of traditional. So what are the differences between simplified and traditional? Well, I think the most obvious difference would be the visual difference, right? So if you just look here, you can see that this radical, the radical for word, I think it is so much simpler in the simplified version. You can see that it's only, I think that's just 2 strokes, whereas the traditional one, that's 7 strokes. So that's a really big difference already, but there are more dramatic examples. So you can see here, this is my name in Chinese, Yun Fei. So you can see right away that the simplified version is just so much more simple. I mean, just look at it. Like, I mean, I like the traditional version more just because like it's what I'm used to seeing personally, and I think it's prettier, but I can't deny that the simplified version is it's just so much easier to deal with than all of this if you're just starting to learn. But of course, there's some characters that are the same within both systems too. So right here, we have some really common Chinese characters. So we have Ren for person, Wo for I, and Hao for good. And these characters, they're all the same in both systems. So another difference is where they're used. So simplified is used in most of the Chinese-speaking world. So, you know, all throughout mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia, they all use simplified. Whereas traditional, it's used in Taiwan for sure. Also, United States, for some reason, we don't really use simplified over here, and Hong Kong and the Philippines as well. So why use simplified Chinese? I mean, I really think it all boils down to it's just easier to learn. Like, it's easier to deal with. So I think one thing that the Chinese government was really trying to accomplish by switching over to simplified was they wanted to spread Chinese writing, like the language, throughout the world. And like, let's be honest, if you're like a French speaker or something and you see like the traditional Chinese characters and how complicated how complicated they are, you'll probably just be like, that's okay. Like, that looks really hard and intimidating. But if you simplify it so that it's like, it just looks a little bit less scary, people will be more inclined to want to learn. So that's one thing. Another thing is that China had a really terrible illiteracy problem, or I guess they still kind of have an illiteracy problem, but especially in the past, it was like really terrible. So let's just see for 1940, okay, so that's like 90% of women couldn't read, and like, let's say that's like 60% of men could read. So that's like a really huge portion of the population that just can't read. And at this time, the economy is like really changing, and there's a demand for jobs that require education. So in order to stay economically relevant, China really needed to get its citizens reading so that they could get, the relevant jobs. And, you can see it, the literacy has increased a lot since the 40s. I mean, like, people's standard of living rose in general, but I think, I don't know, probably the switch to simplified helped a little bit. So now that you've heard all that, you're probably like, okay, so what's the point of traditional Chinese then if it's like really that much more complicated? Like, why would you even bother trying to learn it? Well, a lot of people are really passionate about the preservation of history, and like they really care about the history that's attached to traditional Chinese characters. And a lot of people also think it's just more beautiful. So I wanted to take this example. This character is it's Ai. It's the character for love in Chinese. And if we look at the traditional one, and you look up here at this part, this means action, and down here, this also means action, and in the middle, we have the character for a heart, like literally like the anatomy heart. So it's kind of like almost telling you a little story within the character, like it's saying like, in order to love somebody, you love them with your actions and with your heart. And I think it's just like really sweet and like, I don't know, I think it's nice. But like with the simplified one, you kind of lose that story. Like they take out the heart symbol, and I mean it is easier to write, but like I said, this doesn't have that story anymore. And I also wanted to like quickly touch on some political reasons on why some people they kind of dislike the simplified writing system, and they think it's important to use the traditional writing system. So if you don't know, from 1966 to 1976, the China was undergoing a communist revolution. And during this revolution came the intentional destruction of traditional Chinese culture. I mean, temples were burned, so many historical treasures were just destroyed. And so, for a lot of people, especially Taiwanese people, Taiwan is like, they were the group, like the political group in China that was against communism, and they like had a war against the communists, and then they lost basically, and they like moved to this island called Taiwan, and they called it Taiwan, and like made their own country. And anyways, so a lot of people, especially Taiwanese people of that political party, they really feel like we really need to preserve what is left of traditional Chinese culture, and switching to traditional is just another way of erasing our history and our culture. So, I mean, this is kind of anecdotal evidence. Like, this is kind of like how my mom feels about it and stuff. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But anyways, so which one should you pick? Well, I think it depends on a lot of things. I think the most important thing to consider is, where are you planning on traveling? So like, if you're just planning on staying in America and like you just want to talk to Chinese people here, then I would suggest trying to learn some traditional characters, since that's what we use here. But if you want to go to mainland China, like if you want to visit Beijing or something like that, then simplified is definitely the way to go, just because that's what they use. Like that's what their street signs are, that's what their restaurant menus are. So yeah, there's that. Also, something to consider is, are you like super interested in history? Because I think someone who's like really passionate about history, maybe learning traditional Chinese would be a little bit more fun for you, because well, that's like the ancient method of writing that has been used for so long. And I mean, like the traditional characters, they utilize radicals a lot more. And so by looking at the traditional character, you can kind of like get a sense of like where this came from or like what this word means by like studying the radicals. So that might be fun for you. Also, another thing is the ease of learning. So, in my opinion, I think in the long run, like if you're looking to be super fluent in Chinese, you want to be able to read like complicated textbooks and things like that. I think simplified and traditional are both about as easy to learn. Um, just because, you know, like I was saying before, traditional uses a lot of like it uses more radicals, and once you get to a certain like threshold of literacy, it's like you're gonna be familiar with all the radicals already, and so you'll be able to like look at the character and kind of be like, okay, like I kind of understand what this means, and you know, it's just will be easier for you to remember too, because you can like remember the little story inside the character, and yeah. Um, but I think in the short term, like if you just want to be conversational or if you want to be fluent, but not like crazy super fluent, just like average okay fluent. I don't know. Then I think simplified is probably easier just because like there are less strokes to remember. And it's, you know, I feel like if you don't know Chinese and like you look at traditional characters, it's kind of just like, what am I even looking at? Like there's so many little marks everywhere. So yeah, that's something to consider too. And that's it. That's all I have for my presentation. Thank you. Um, I have to stop recording.